The Appalachian haze settled over the hickory and oak trees, a persistent, damp chill that was the very soul of Harmony Creek, Pennsylvania. The town itself was little more than a single main street carved into the rolling hills, a collection of sturdy, weathered storefronts that seemed to huddle together against the encroaching wilderness. For most, it was a place to pass through on the way to somewhere else. For Caleb Hayes, it was the end of the line, a place to bury the man he used to be. Caleb stood on the porch of his newly purchased farmhouse, a solid structure of fieldstone and timber set on 50 acres of rolling woodland. His hands, scarred and calloused from a life of hard use, rested on the railing. He was a man built of lean, efficient muscle with a stillness that came only from years of harsh discipline or deep trauma. In his case, it was both. His short brown hair was beginning to show silver at the temples, and his eyes, a sharp, piercing blue, were constantly scanning, sorting, assessing. It was a reflex he couldn't switch off, a ghost of the life he'd run from. Beside him, a magnificent German shepherd sat with quiet dignity, its head held high in the cool air. This was Kaiser. His coat was a deep sable, his ears perpetually alert. Unlike a typical pet, Kaiser carried himself with the same disciplined stillness as his master. He was a retired military working dog, a fellow veteran of the same dusty, hellish battlefields that had forged and nearly broken Caleb. They were the last two living members of their unit, a fact that hung between them and the unspoken language of shared experience. Caleb had bought the property with the last of his savings, a final, desperate bid for peace. The official report said his team had been killed in a training exercise gone wrong. Caleb knew better. It was an ambush, a setup. He had survived only through brutal instinct and a timely warning from Kaiser, who had taken shrapnel to his hind leg in the process. The slight limp was a permanent reminder. After that, Caleb Hayes, Navy SEAL, ceased to exist. He became a ghost, moving across the country until he found a place remote enough to quiet the echoes of screams, gunfire, and betrayal. "It's just us now, buddy," Caleb whispered, his voice raspy from disuse. Kaiser's ears twitched in response, and he rested his head against Caleb's leg. The gesture was all the reassurance Caleb needed. Here, the only sounds were the wind through the trees and the distant cry of a hawk. Here, there were no enemies hiding in the shadows. He hoped. He spent the first few weeks fortifying his sanctuary, not with military-grade defenses, but with the simple labor of his hands. He split firewood, stacking it in neat, precise cords that reached the eaves of the farmhouse. He repaired the sagging barbed wire fence that marked his property line, his movements economical and efficient. Every swing of the axe, every nail driven into a post, was a meditation, a physical act to drown out the noise in his head. Kaiser was his constant companion, watching from a patch of sun or trotting along the fence line, his presence a silent, steady anchor. One afternoon, as the sun began to dip behind the wooded hills, casting long, cool shadows across the valley, the sound of an engine broke the profound quiet. It was a low rumble, unfamiliar and unwelcome. Instantly, Caleb's hand went to the small of his back, a phantom gesture, searching for a weapon that was no longer there. His posture straightened, his body shifting into a state of relaxed readiness. Kaiser rose in one fluid motion, a low growl vibrating in his chest, but he did not bark. He watched Caleb, waiting for a command. A battered Chevy pickup, its blue paint faded and patched with rust, was making its way slowly up the gravel drive. It stopped about 30 yards from the house. Caleb held his ground on the porch, positioning himself with the door at his back, his body language making it clear that this was a guarded welcome at best. The driver's side door creaked open, and a man emerged. He was old, probably in his late 70s, tall and wiry with a shock of white hair. He wore faded overalls over a flannel shirt and moved with a slow, deliberate care that spoke of old injuries managed with stubborn pride. This was Frank Miller, his only neighbor, whose property bordered Caleb's a mile to the east. Frank raised one hand, not a wave, but a simple gesture of peace. "Mean no trespass," he called out, his voice weathered like old leather, "just wanted to welcome you to the neighborhood, such as it is." He kept a respectful distance, his eyes pale and sharp under thick white brows, taking everything in. He saw Caleb, a man coiled as tight as a spring. He saw the dog, a professional not a pet, and he saw the way they both watched him, not with curiosity, but with a trained, unwavering focus. Caleb gave a curt nod. "Caleb Hayes." "Frank Miller," the old man replied. He slowly reached into the truck bed and pulled out a small wooden crate. "Figured you could use this more than a casserole." He walked up to the porch and set the crate down. Inside, two thick, freshly caught trout lay on a bed of ice. Caleb looked from the fish to the old man. It was a practical, thoughtful gift, a gesture of respect. "Appreciate it," Caleb said, his voice softening slightly. Frank nodded, his gaze lingering on Caleb for a moment. Marines, he stated. Wasn't a question. Caleb's eyes narrowed. Navy. Close enough, Frank grunted, a flicker of a smile touching his lips for the first time. You got the look of a man who's seen things. Things that don't wash off. He glanced at Kaiser, who still hadn't taken his eyes off him. That's a fine-looking animal. Bet he's seen him too. An unspoken understanding passed between the two men, a recognition that went beyond words. It was in the way they stood, the way they watched the world, the shared knowledge of what it cost to be a soldier. Frank Miller wasn't just some old farmer. He was a warrior. Just like Caleb. The generation and the branch of service didn't matter. He does his job, Caleb said, which was the highest praise he could offer. They always do, Frank agreed. He turned to leave, then paused. This is a quiet place, Mr. Hayes. A good place to be left alone. Most folks respect that. He looked Caleb square in the eye, his expression serious. But this valley's changing. Be watchful. With that cryptic warning, Frank got back in his truck, the old engine starting with a protesting groan before rumbling back down the drive. Caleb watched until the truck was gone, the dust settling in the golden evening light. He carried the crate of fish inside, the fresh, cold scent filling the small kitchen. Kaiser nudged his hand, finally relaxing his vigil. Caleb knelt and scratched the dog behind the ears, his fingers sinking into the thick fur. The old man's words echoed in his head. Be watchful. He had come here to stop being watchful, to finally let his guard down. But as the last of the day's light faded and the vast, starry dark of the Pennsylvania wilderness enveloped the farmhouse, Caleb couldn't shake the feeling that the ghosts he was running from were no more dangerous than the threats he might have to face. The sanctuary he was trying to build felt fragile, and the peace he craved was not yet his. For 2 weeks, Caleb's world remained confined to the 50 acres of Pennsylvania woodland he now called home. The simple, rhythmic cycle of dawn, labor, and dusk began to work its magic, wearing away at the sharpest edges of his grief and paranoia. But even a ghost needs to eat. His supplies were running low, and the trip into Harmony Creek could no longer be avoided. It felt like a violation, a voluntary step back into a world he had rejected. He loaded Kaiser into the passenger seat of his old pickup, the dog settling in with the stoic calm of a seasoned traveler. As they rumbled down the winding country road, the crisp autumn air carried the scent of pine and damp earth. Harmony Creek appeared in the valley below, a small wound of civilization in an otherwise unbroken expanse of green and gray. The town's main street was quiet, but it wasn't peaceful. Caleb felt it the moment he stepped out of the truck. It was the quiet of a place holding its breath. He saw the for sale signs in the windows of a few businesses, their glass dusty and vacant. He saw locals talking in small, hushed groups, their eyes flicking toward a newly constructed, overly modern office building at the end of the street. It bore a polished brass plaque, Croft Enterprises. Caleb's destination was Peterson's General Store, a relic from another era with worn floorboards that creaked under his boots and shelves stacked high to the ceiling with everything from canned goods to rifle ammunition. A portly man with a friendly face and inquisitive eyes stood behind the counter. This was Mr. Peterson, a man whose family had run this store for 3 generations. Help you with something? Peterson asked, his eyes traveling from Caleb's guarded face to the formidable dog standing at his side. Just a few things, Caleb replied, his voice low. He moved through the narrow aisles with purpose, grabbing flour, coffee, canned meat, and a large bag of high-protein dog food. He was aware of the other shoppers, the handful of locals who had paused their conversations to watch him. He was an anomaly, a stranger who wasn't a tourist, a man who moved with the economy of motion of a predator. Their whispers followed him like rustling leaves. As he reached the counter, a woman stepped away from the coffee machine in the corner. She was in her 30s with sharp, intelligent features, dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and observant brown eyes that missed nothing. She wore no uniform, but she carried herself with an air of innate authority. This was Sheriff Kate Riley. You must be the one who bought the old Callaway place, she said, her tone even and direct. It was a statement, not a question. Caleb met her eyes and gave a curt nod. Kate Riley, she introduced herself, not offering a hand. I'm the sheriff here. Her gaze dropped to Kaiser, who sat perfectly still, watching her with an unnerving focus. Quite a partner you've got there. He's no stray. He's retired, Caleb said simply, placing his items on the counter. From what? She pressed, her curiosity professional. A previous line of work. Sheriff Riley's lips formed a thin line. She was a woman who had fought for her respect in a town that was slow to change, and she didn't appreciate being stonewalled. She recognized the look in Caleb's eyes, the haunted, hyper-aware gaze she'd seen in soldiers returning from war, including her own brother. He was a puzzle she felt compelled to solve, a potential threat she needed to assess. "Well, Mr. Hayes," she said, having clearly already learned his name, "Harmony Creek is a quiet town. We have our problems, but we handle them. We don't have much patience for trouble from outsiders." "I'm not looking for trouble," Caleb said, his voice level. It was a promise, but it was also a warning. Before she could respond, the bell over the door jingled, and another presence filled the small store. A man in a perfectly tailored gray suit stepped inside, his polished Italian shoes looking absurd on the dusty floorboards. He was handsome in a sharp, predatory way with slicked back dark hair and a smile that was perfectly calibrated but held no warmth. This was Harrison Croft. The atmosphere in the store changed instantly. The locals fell silent, their expressions a mixture of resentment and fear. Mr. Peterson behind the counter suddenly looked very busy polishing a spot on the countertop. Croft's eyes, the color of cold steel, swept the room and landed on Caleb. He moved forward, his movements smooth and confident, exuding an aura of immense wealth and power. "You must be Caleb Hayes," Croft said, his voice a cultured, resonant baritone. He extended a manicured hand. "Harrison Croft, a pleasure to meet the man who bought the last crucial piece of my puzzle." Caleb ignored the outstretched hand. "The farmhouse isn't for sale." Croft's smile didn't falter, but a dangerous glint appeared in his eyes. "Oh, I think you misunderstand. I don't just buy property, Mr. Hayes. I'm building a future for this valley. A luxury resort, exclusive homes, a private airstrip. Progress. Your 50 acres happen to sit right in the middle of my primary access route." He lowered his voice, creating a bubble of false intimacy around them. "I'm prepared to make you a very generous offer, enough to set you up anywhere you'd like, far from here. Name your price." The offer hung in the air, thick with unspoken threats. Caleb could feel the weight of it, the assumption that every man had a price, that his desire to be left alone could be bought and sold like any other commodity. "I have everything I need," Caleb said, his voice quiet but unyielding. He paid Peterson for his items, his movements calm and deliberate. Croft's smile finally vanished, replaced by a look of cold fury that he quickly masked. "A shame," he said softly. "Progress can be a powerful current, Mr. Hayes. It would be a terrible thing to find yourself drowned for refusing to swim with it." He gave a polite nod to Sheriff Riley, who had watched the entire exchange with a stony expression, and then exited the store. A moment later, his black SUV started up and glided away, leaving a profound silence in its wake. Caleb gathered his bags, gave a final nod to the sheriff, and walked outside, Kaiser at his heels. The ride back to the farmhouse was quiet. The illusion of his sanctuary was shattered. He hadn't escaped the world of predators and power struggles. He had just found a different jungle. As he stood on his porch once again, the sun setting behind the hills, he watched the tree line with a renewed sense of vigilance. The enemy now had a name and a face, and they had made it clear they would not take no for an answer. Beside him, Kaiser let out a low growl, sensing the change in his master. The peace was over. The war had followed him home. The warning from Harrison Croft hung in the air for days, a bitter aftertaste to the fragile peace Caleb had found. He tried to ignore it, burying himself in the rhythm of work, telling himself Croft was a man of bluster and intimidation, not direct action. It was a mistake, a soldier's cardinal sin. He had underestimated his enemy. The day began with a deceptive calm. A rare, brilliant sun burned through the morning haze, turning the damp forest floor into a tapestry of light and shadow. Caleb was on the southern edge of his property, clearing a massive oak that had fallen in a recent storm. The work was grueling, the air filled with the scent of sawdust and the steady roar of his chainsaw. It was loud, all-consuming work that left him temporarily deaf to the world. He didn't hear the angry buzz of the ATVs. Kaiser did. From his post near the farmhouse, the dog's head shot up, his ears swiveling to pinpoint the sound. 3 teenagers on loud, aggressive four-wheelers were tearing up the access road, their laughter sharp and ugly as they deliberately flung mud onto the fence line. Leading them was a boy of about 18 named Tyler. He was broad-shouldered and smug with the cruel smirk of someone who had never been told no. His father was one of Croft's foremen, and Tyler moved through the world with the borrowed arrogance of his father's powerful employer. Flanking him were 2 other boys, followers who fed off his bravado. Kaiser moved to intercept, not with an attack, but with the disciplined confidence of his training. He planted himself in the middle of the road, a low, authoritative growl rumbling in his chest. It was a clear command, this far and no further. The boys skidded to a halt, surprised by the dog's presence. "Well, look at this," Tyler sneered, killing his engine. Old man Hayes has a guard dog. My dad says Hayes is a problem, one of the others said nervously. Says Croft wants him gone. Then maybe we should help, Tyler said, a vicious idea dawning in his eyes. He swung his leg off the machine, grabbing a thick, heavy branch from the side of the road. Let's teach this mutt and his owner a lesson about respect. Kaiser stood his ground, his growl deepening into a warning bark. He didn't retreat. He didn't attack. He held the line. It was the last thing he did as a whole and healthy dog. Tyler swung the branch with all his strength, connecting with the side of Kaiser's head with a sickening crack. The magnificent animal staggered. A pained yelp escaped its throat. The other two, emboldened, joined in, kicking and striking the disoriented dog until it collapsed to the ground, limp and silent. Satisfied with their cruel work, they laughed, started their engines, and sped off, leaving a trail of torn-up earth and shattered piece behind them. An hour later, Caleb finished his work. The silence that greeted him as he switched off the chainsaw was the first alarm bell. It was too quiet. Kaiser, he called, his voice echoing through the trees. Nothing. Not the familiar jingle of his collar, not the soft pat of his paws on the trail. Kaiser, he called again, louder, a cold knot of dread tightening in his gut. He broke into a jog back toward the cabin, his eyes scanning the ground. He saw the deep, ragged tracks of the intruders first. The dread turned to ice. He followed the tracks, his movement shifting from a woodsman's gait to a hunter's stalk. He saw the churned up earth, the discarded branch, and a dark, damp patch on the ground that turned his blood cold. A trail of disturbed leaves and a few faint drops of blood led toward the creek. Caleb followed it, his heart beating a slow, heavy rhythm against his ribs. He found him there, half submerged in the shallow, ice-cold water. Kaiser's powerful body was unnaturally still, his breathing shallow and ragged. One side of his noble head was a ruined mess of matted fur, blood, and splintered bone. His eyes were closed, and a faint, pained whimper escaped his lips with every breath. For a long moment, Caleb didn't move. The world seemed to stop. The sound of the creek and the wind in the trees faded to a low roar in his ears. This wasn't the chaotic violence of combat. This was different. This was personal. This was a violation of the only pure thing he had left in his life. The training took over. He knelt, his movements clinical and precise, assessing the damage. Severe head trauma, possible broken ribs, shock. He had to move him, and he had to do it now. All the rage, all the grief, all the violence he had tried to bury deep inside himself rose again, not as a hot, chaotic fury, but as a cold, crystalline focus. The man who had sought peace was gone. In his place was the operator, the hunter, the instrument of vengeance he had been trained to be. With infinite gentleness, he slid his arms under Kaiser's body, lifting his 100-pound companion as if he weighed nothing at all. Kaiser whimpered again, a sound that cut deep into Caleb's soul. I got you, buddy, Caleb whispered, his voice thick with an emotion he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. I got you. He carried him back to the farmhouse, his long, powerful strides eating up the distance. He laid Kaiser carefully on a thick blanket by the hearth, covering him to fight the shock. He worked quickly, cleaning the wound as best he could, his hands steady despite the tremor of rage that ran through him. This wasn't a random act of vandalism. This was a message, delivered with calculated cruelty. They hadn't come for him. They had come for what he loved. They had sought to break his spirit by breaking his friend's body. Harrison Croft had made a profound miscalculation. He thought he was dealing with a broken man who wanted to be left alone. He didn't know that in trying to crush that man's spirit, he had unleashed a ghost from its grave. Caleb looked down at his broken friend, then out the window into the gathering dark. This was no longer about a piece of land. It was no longer about being left alone. This was about a debt, and Caleb Hayes was going to see it paid in full. The 20-mile drive to the town of Millfield felt like a century. Caleb pushed his truck to its limit, the engine screaming in protest as he navigated the winding country roads with a cold, surgical precision. Beside him, wrapped in every blanket Caleb could find, Kaiser's breathing was a shallow, worrying rasp. Every bump and turn in the road was a potential agony for his injured companion, and Caleb felt each one like a physical blow. He wasn't driving to the local vet in Harmony Creek. That was Croft's territory. For this, he needed someone he could trust implicitly. He skidded to a stop in the gravel parking lot of a small, unassuming building set back from Millfield's main road. The sign read, Volkov Animal Clinic. He gathered Kaiser's limp body into his arms and burst through the door. A woman with a severe face, high cheekbones, and silver hair pulled into a tight bun looked up from her desk, her expression one of annoyance at the intrusion. But the moment she saw the dog, her demeanor changed. This was Dr. Anya Volkov, a veterinarian with hands as skilled as any surgeon's and a gaze that could peel a man's secrets away layer by layer. She was a Polish immigrant who had served as a contract vet for NATO Special Operations units in Afghanistan. She knew the look of a military dog, and she knew the look of a soldier on the edge. "On my table, now," she commanded, her voice a low, gravelly instrument of authority. Caleb gently placed Kaiser on the stainless steel examination table. Dr. Volkov's hands moved with incredible speed and efficiency, assessing the damage, her lips a thin, grim line. "What did this?" she asked, not looking up as she prepared a syringe. "A message," Caleb said, his voice tight. She flicked a glance at him then, her sharp gray eyes boring into his for a long moment. "The messages seem to be getting louder these days," she said cryptically, before turning her full attention back to her patient. "Go wait. I will do what I can. This will take time." Forced into inaction, Caleb retreated to the small, sterile waiting room. The feeling of helplessness was a poison. He was a man trained to solve problems with decisive, violent action. But here, he could only sit and trust in the skill of another. He watched the clock on the wall, each tick a hammer blow against his composure. The quiet hum of the clinic's fluorescent lights felt deafening. He got up and paced by the window, his gaze scanning the quiet street outside. Habit. And then he saw it. A dark blue sedan with tinted windows. It passed the clinic once, then twice. It was too slow, too deliberate. His instincts, honed by years of being hunted, screamed at him. They had followed him, or they had been waiting. The attack on Kaiser wasn't just a message. It was a probe, designed to force him out of his hideout to see how he would react. He pulled a small burner phone from an emergency kit hidden under the seat of his truck. He had two. This one had only a single number programmed into it, a contact he had prayed he would never have to use. He stepped out the back of the clinic into a small, fenced yard, making sure he was out of sight. He dialed the number and waited. It rang twice. "It's a fine day for fishing," a calm voice said on the other end, the agreed-upon code. "Forecast is calling for a storm," Caleb replied, his voice low. "Leo, it's me." The man on the other end was Leo Gallo. Call sign Riptide. He was the only other name not carved on the memorial wall for Caleb's team. A wizard with communications and tech, Leo was the calm center in any storm. A man whose easygoing demeanor hid a mind as sharp and dangerous as a razor blade. "Figured you'd be calling soon," Leo said, his voice devoid of surprise. "Let me guess, you had some uninvited guests." "They went after my dog, Leo," Caleb said, the words catching in his throat. "They almost killed him." There was a moment of silence on the line, but Caleb could feel the shift, the easygoing friend vanishing, replaced by the cold fury of a fellow SEAL. "How bad?" "Critical. The vet's with him now." "Stay put. I'm 40 minutes out." "Negative," Caleb said immediately. "The area's compromised. I've picked up a tail. This phone is clean, but my location isn't." "Copy that," Leo said, his tone all business. "Then listen up, this is more than local trouble, Caleb. It's not about your land. I've been digging ever since I got stateside. They're watching me, too. Not Croft's local thugs. Professionals. I ran the plates on one of their surveillance cars. It's a shell corporation that traces back to the same people who fed us the bad intel for Operation Sandpiper. Operation Sandpiper, the name of their last mission, the ambush, the op that had wiped out their team. The pieces clicked into place in Caleb's mind, forming a terrifyingly clear picture. They weren't just killing us, Caleb said, the realization dawning on him. They were cleaning house. We're not survivors. We're loose ends. Exactly, Leo confirmed. Whatever we stumbled onto, they're still protecting it. And now they know where we both are. Your little standoff with the local kingpin just put you dead in their crosshairs. A door opened behind Caleb. It was Dr. Volkov. Her face was grim, her surgical scrub stained with blood. "I have to go," Caleb said into the phone. "New phone, new number. I'll make contact in 24. He ended the call without waiting for a reply. He turned to face the vet, bracing himself. "He is alive," she said, her voice heavy with fatigue. "He is strong, but the damage is severe. I have repaired the fractures in his skull as best I can, but there is swelling on the brain. The next 12 hours will tell us if he will survive." Caleb felt a wave of relief so powerful it nearly buckled his knees. But it was followed by the cold reality of her words. "If he will survive. I found this," Dr. Volkov said, holding up a small, clear plastic bag. Inside was a dark blue fleck of metal. It was embedded in the deepest part of the wound. It is not from a branch or a rock. It is high-grade paint, automotive paint, perhaps from a crowbar, or a tire iron. Caleb took the bag, his knuckles white as he stared at the tiny piece of evidence. It was proof, tangible proof of the cold, calculated cruelty of the attack. He needs to stay here, the vet said, her sharp eyes studying him. He cannot be moved. And you, soldier, you have a fight to fight, do you not? Caleb looked from the small fleck of metal in his hand to the closed door of the operating room where his best friend lay fighting for his life. The enemy wasn't just Harrison Croft anymore. It was a ghost from his past, a powerful, shadowy organization that had already killed his entire team and would not hesitate to finish the job. But now they had made it personal. They had crossed a line. And Caleb Hayes was about to remind them what happens when you corner a ghost. The drive back to Harmony Creek was a journey into a cold, controlled rage. The rain that had been threatening all afternoon finally broke, lashing against the windshield in relentless sheets. Each sweep of the wipers revealed the same dark, winding road, a tunnel through the oppressive wilderness. Caleb drove with an unnerving calm, his hands steady on the wheel, but his mind was a whirlwind. The conversation with Leo had stripped away his last illusions. This wasn't a new war. It was the last, unfinished battle of a war he thought he had escaped. He didn't drive straight to the farmhouse. To do so would have been an amateur's mistake. Instead, he parked his truck in a dense thicket of trees half a mile away. The downpour provided the perfect cover for his approach. The man who had walked out of these woods weeks ago was gone. The man who moved through them now was a ghost, a seal returning to a compromised safe house. He moved on foot, circling his own property, his steps silent on the rain-soaked ground. He moved in a wide perimeter, his eyes scanning for anything out of place. A broken twig, a scuff in the mud, the faint glint of a surveillance lens. He found nothing, but the absence of evidence was not evidence of absence. He assumed he was being watched. He assumed the farmhouse was a trap. After satisfying himself that the immediate area was clear, he approached the farmhouse from the rear, using a massive cluster of boulders as his final cover. He didn't use the door. Next to the stone chimney, a section of the timber wall looked identical to the rest. But Caleb knew that 2 of those logs were false. He pressed on a specific knot in the wood, and a tiny, almost invisible seam appeared. A section of the wall swung inward with well-oiled silence. He slipped inside, closing the secret entrance behind him. The air in the farmhouse was still and cold. Nothing was disturbed, but Caleb knew that the farmhouse's true security didn't lie in its locks. It lay beneath its floorboards. He went to the large, cast-iron wood stove that dominated the main room. After ensuring the curtains were drawn, he reached deep into the cold firebox, his fingers finding a small, recessed lever. He pulled it. With a low hydraulic hiss, a section of the stone hearth behind the stove lifted, revealing a set of steep steel stairs descending into absolute blackness. This was the farmhouse's true purpose. It wasn't a home. It was a hardened shell built around a secret. He had spent 6 months building this place after Operation Sandpiper, pouring his grief and paranoia into concrete and steel. He descended the stairs, and a motion sensor triggered a series of low-intensity LED lights. The rustic warmth of the farmhouse above vanished, replaced by the sterile cold of a bunker. The walls were reinforced concrete, the air cool and dry, filtered by a silent, closed-loop system. This was his sanctuary, his armory, and the repository of his betrayal. On one wall, a series of weapons were neatly racked. A suppressed M4 carbine, his custom Sig Sauer P226, and a long-range sniper rifle, each meticulously maintained. Beside them was a suite of modern communications gear capable of encrypted satellite bursts. But the heart of the bunker was a small, titanium-encased hard drive housed in a climate-controlled safe. This was his insurance policy. The unofficial after-action report he had built for himself after his team was killed, compiled in a fugue of rage and suspicion. He connected the drive to a terminal, his fingers flying across the keyboard. A series of security protocols flashed on the screen, demanding passwords and biometric confirmation. He pressed his thumb to a scanner, and the screen flashed green. Access granted. The contents of Operation Sandpiper flooded the screen. Not the sanitized, official version, but the raw, unfiltered truth. It was all there. Satellite imagery, intercepted communications, money transfers, and personnel files. He scrolled past the faces of his fallen teammates, a familiar ache settling in his chest. Then he found what he was looking for. The mission had been to neutralize a weapons smuggling ring in a remote, disputed territory. The intel had identified a meet between the smugglers and a group of insurgents. But the intel had been a lie. It was a trap, designed to eliminate his team, who had unwittingly gotten too close to the truth. The truth was, there were no insurgents. The buyers were operatives for a rival government, and the smugglers were contractors working for an American. The entire operation was a clandestine arms deal, trading advanced U.S. military tech for a massive off-the-books fortune, and orchestrating it all from the shadows was a single, powerful figure. Caleb opened a file labeled Wallace. A photo appeared on screen. It showed a man in his 50s with a mane of silver hair, a patrician face, and cold, intelligent eyes that held a hint of deep-seated arrogance. The caption identified him as Director Robert Wallace, the head of a special projects division of a clandestine and immensely powerful intelligence agency. He was a man who officially did not exist, a puppet master pulling strings at the highest levels of government. The evidence was undeniable. Encrypted emails between Wallace and his offshore bankers, shipping manifests for agricultural equipment that matched the serial numbers of stolen military drones and targeting systems, and the crucial piece of the puzzle, the corporate registration for the logistics company handling the transport. The company's name was Croft Enterprises. Harrison Croft wasn't just a greedy developer. He was Wallace's man on the ground, the respectable face of a treasonous operation. His plan to buy up the land in Harmony Creek wasn't to build a resort. It was to create a private, secure transportation corridor, an illegal highway to move stolen military hardware from a nearby depot to a hidden airstrip without any oversight. Caleb leaned back, the full scope of the conspiracy washing over him like a shroud. His team hadn't just stumbled upon a smuggling ring. They had been sacrificed to protect a traitor at the very heart of the American intelligence community, and he and Leo were the last loose threads in Wallace's perfectly woven tapestry of betrayal. The attack on Kaiser suddenly made perfect, brutal sense. It was Wallace's style, executed through Croft. An indirect attack designed for deniability, a cruel and personal warning. They were telling him they knew where he was, and they could touch anything and anyone he cared about. He looked at the weapons racked on the wall. He had come here to escape the war, but the war had found him. He could run, disappear again, and hope they didn't find him. Or he could fight. He thought of Kaiser, lying broken on a sterile table because of these men. He thought of his teammates, dead and buried, their names stained by a cover-up. The choice was no choice at all. He wasn't a victim to be hunted. He was a SEAL. He was the ghost they should have been afraid of, and he was about to burn their entire rotten enterprise to the ground. The bunker was Caleb's fortress, but it was also a cage. He spent the next 12 hours immersed in the digital ghosts of the past, sifting through the evidence on the hard drive. He had the truth, a weapon powerful enough to burn Director Wallace's empire to the ground. But he was a ghost, a dead man. A ghost can't testify in court. A ghost can't issue warrants or make arrests. To go against a man like Wallace, he needed more than guns and evidence. He needed something he had sworn to stay away from: legitimacy. He needed the law, the thought of trusting anyone, especially law enforcement, went against every instinct that had kept him alive. Any agency could be compromised by Wallace's people. Any cop could be on his payroll. But Sheriff Kate Riley was different. He'd seen it in her eyes in the general store. She was a woman who owned her authority, not one who borrowed it. She'd looked at Harrison Croft with genuine contempt. It was a long shot, but it was the only one he had. He couldn't just walk into her office. That would be a death sentence for them both. He had to draw her out, meet her on his terms, on neutral ground. He spent the next few hours preparing a package. He carefully selected files from the hard drive, creating a sanitized version of the truth. He included satellite images of Croft's property showing the construction of reinforced structures and unusually wide access roads inconsistent with a luxury resort. He added shipping manifests for mining equipment sent to Croft Enterprises, cross-referencing the container numbers with public maritime logs that showed they originated from a port known for arms trafficking. He included financial records showing a network of shell companies Croft used to purchase the land, all funded by a single untraceable offshore account. He left out any mention of Director Wallace, Operation Sandpiper, or his own past. The package was designed to paint Croft as a high-level domestic smuggler, a fish big enough to warrant a serious investigation, but not so big as to trigger a federal cover-up. To this, he added his own fresh intelligence. Using a long-range lens from the farmhouse attic window, he had captured photos of Croft's security team. They weren't local toughs. They were professionals carrying military-grade hardware. He even caught a late-night delivery, a large, unmarked truck arriving at a supposedly inactive warehouse owned by Croft. He placed a single encrypted flash drive containing the files into a plain brown envelope. On a slip of paper, he wrote a simple message: If you care about what's happening to your town, meet me. Midnight. The old service rode off Highway 26. Come alone. He drove to a neighboring town, mailed the envelope to the sheriff's station from a public mailbox, and was back in his sanctuary before dawn. Now all he could do was wait and see if the sheriff was the woman he thought she was. That night, the air was cold and sharp. A sliver of a moon offered little light. Caleb was in position an hour before midnight, hidden in the dense tree line overlooking the abandoned service road. He was a shadow, invisible, watching the empty road. At midnight sharp, a single set of headlights cut through the darkness. It was the official sheriff's cruiser. It stopped, and a single figure got out. Sheriff Riley. She had followed his instructions. She stood by her car, her hand resting on her holstered weapon, her breath fogging in the cold air as she scanned the impenetrable blackness of the forest. "All right, Hayes," she called out, her voice steady and clear. "I'm here. You wanted to talk, so talk. You've got 5 minutes before I call this in as a potential ambush." Caleb stepped out from the trees, moving with an unnerving silence. He stopped about 20 feet from her, maintaining a safe distance. "Thanks for coming, Sheriff." "I'm not here for pleasantries," she snapped, her eyes hard. "I'm here because you sent an anonymous and threatening summons to a law enforcement officer. That's a felony, so you better have a damn good reason." "I have a reason," Caleb said, tossing the brown envelope onto the ground between them. "That's for you. It's everything you need to see what Harrison Croft is really doing to your town." She didn't move to pick it up. Her eyes stayed locked on him, searching, assessing. "And what do you think he's doing?" "He's not building a resort. He's building a highway, a private corridor to move illegal goods without oversight. The photos on that drive show military-grade security and questionable shipments. The financial records show a criminal enterprise. He's a cancer, and he's using your town as a host." Riley let out a short, harsh laugh. "You think I don't know Croft is a snake? I've been trying to get something on him for a year, but he's clean, got powerful friends, deep pockets. All I have is suspicion. What makes you think your little envelope is any different?" "Because I'm not a cop," Caleb said, his voice dropping, taking on a hard edge. "I don't need probable cause or a warrant to look into things. I just need to look." She finally broke eye contact and cautiously approached the envelope, picking it up. She pulled out the flash drive. "And why should I trust this? Why should I trust you? What's your stake in all this, Hayes? This isn't your town. This isn't your fight." Caleb thought of Kaiser fighting for his life on a steel table. He thought of his team, buried and betrayed. "They made it my fight," he said, his voice filled with a cold, quiet rage that was more convincing than any shout. Riley was silent for a long moment, weighing the man in front of her, the evidence in her hand, and the risk she was about to take. "I grew up here," she said finally, her voice softer, tinged with a deep weariness. "I watched this town die. Watched my friends leave, watched good people get desperate. My brother, he enlisted just to get out, to find a future this place couldn't give him." She looked up, her gaze locking with his. "Croft came in with his promises, and I saw how people looked at him. But I also saw what he was doing. He's not saving this town. He's carving it up for parts. If what's on this drive is real and I act on it, he'll come after me. He'll use his money and his lawyers to destroy me. He'll do more than that if you get too close," Caleb warned. "I know," she said. She pocketed the flash drive. A decision had been made. "I'll look at this. If it's solid, I'll open a confidential inquiry, off the books. But you need to understand this. I'm reading you in. You're my confidential informant. That means you report to me, and only me. And if I find out you're playing me or if this is part of some private war, I will hunt you down myself." Caleb nodded. "Understood. And one more thing," she added, her eyes narrowing. "I have 4 deputies. I trust 3 of them with my life. The 4th, he spends a little too much time at Croft's new steakhouse, so this stays between us." "Crystal clear," Caleb replied. The alliance was formed, as fragile and cold as the midnight air. They weren't partners. They were 2 tired, desperate people aiming their weapons at the same enemy. "Go," she ordered. "Don't contact me again. I'll contact you." Caleb faded back into the forest without another word. Sheriff Riley stood for a moment, the weight of her decision settling on her shoulders. She had just made a deal with a ghost, betting her career and possibly her life on the word of a man she didn't know. But as she got back in her car, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. A flicker of hope. She had a thread to pull. And she was going to pull it until the whole rotten tapestry came undone. The storm that had been brewing in the hills finally broke with the ferocity of an artillery barrage. Rain hammered the farmhouse's metal roof, and wind howled through the oaks, their massive trunks groaning in protest. It was a perfect night for violence. Nature's chaos provided a welcome cover for man's. Caleb wasn't sleeping. He was in the bunker, a steaming mug of black coffee beside him, watching a bank of monitors. The feeds came from a series of small, hardened cameras he had placed around his property, their thermal imaging cutting through the rain and darkness. He had known they would come. After the attack on Kaiser, after the talk with Leo, it wasn't a question of if, but when. At 01:17, he saw it. The perimeter camera on the main access road flickered, then went dead. They'd cut the line. On another screen, thermal signatures began to appear at the edge of the woods. Not the clumsy blobs of deer or bear. These were the disciplined, muted shapes of men moving in a tactical formation. 8 of them. They moved with a predatory grace, their weapons held at a low ready, their gear professional. Mercenaries. Caleb's face was a mask of cold calm. The waiting was over. He sent a single encrypted text from a satellite phone to Leo's new number, Storm. Then he began shutting down the monitors. He didn't need them anymore. He had the terrain, and the layout of his own kill box, memorized. He ascended the stairs, the hydraulic hiss of the hearth ceiling behind him, locking him in the world above. The farmhouse was dark, lit only by the faint, silvery light of the storm outside. The mercenary team's leader, a man known only as Alpha, scanned the dark farmhouse through his thermal scope. "Power's out," he murmured into his throat mic. "Target is dark. He knows we're here. 2-man teams, move in a pincer, no radio chatter unless necessary. Go." The teams melted into the trees, closing in on the farmhouse like wolves. One of the men, moving with careless confidence, snagged his boot on a thin, nearly invisible tripwire. There was no explosion. Instead, a low-intensity chemical flare ignited with a soft hiss, bathing a 20-foot radius in an inescapable, eerie green light. The man was perfectly exposed. From a narrow, reinforced slit of a window in the farmhouse attic, there was a single, soft cough from a suppressed rifle. The illuminated mercenary crumpled to the ground, a neat, dark hole appearing in the center of his chest. "Contact!" Another merc yelled, breaking radio silence. "Viper is down." Alpha's voice cut through the rising panic, cold and angry. "Find him. He's in the attic." But Caleb was no longer in the attic. He was already moving through the darkened farmhouse, a ghost in his own home. He moved from one pre-prepared firing position to another, each offering a different angle on the property. As 2 more mercenaries broke from the tree line to provide cover, a second rifle shot cracked through the valley. This one was different, louder, deeper. It didn't come from the farmhouse, but from the ridgeline 1,000 yards to the east. One of the advancing men was thrown backward as if hit by a sledgehammer, his body armor no match for the high-velocity round. The mercenaries scattered, confused. The shot hadn't come from the target's location. They were being engaged from a second, unknown position. On that ridgeline, Frank Miller lay prone behind his old M40 sniper rifle, a relic from his time in the service. He had seen the professional approach of the armed men through his binoculars. He had seen the flare. He hadn't needed an invitation. This was his mountain, and these were trespassers. With a calm, practiced movement, he worked the bolt, chambering another round, his old eyes scanning for his next target. Below, the assault faltered, but only for a moment. Alpha, realizing he was caught in a multi-front engagement, made a decision. Forget the perimeter. Breach the house. Flush him out. The remaining 4 mercenaries converged on the farmhouse. 2 went for the front door while Alpha and another man went to the back. A battering ram slammed against the heavy oak front door. It shuddered but held. Caleb had reinforced it with a steel plate. From his position in the kitchen, Caleb watched the back door. He heard the telltale click of a breaching charge being set. He dove behind a heavy, custom-made kitchen island just as the door blew inward in a shower of splintered wood. Alpha and his man rushed in, their weapons sweeping the room. Caleb fired from his low position, his round striking the second man in the legs, sending him crashing to the floor. Alpha returned fire, bullets ripping through the island's thick countertop, forcing Caleb to stay down. Suddenly, from the main room, came a sound Caleb didn't expect. It was a low, pained, but immensely threatening growl. Kaiser. The dog was on his thick blanket by the cold hearth, unable to stand, his head bandaged, but his senses were still sharp. Alpha, moving to flank Caleb, had entered the dog's field of view. The growl was weak, but it was enough. The sound distracted Alpha for a fraction of a second. He glanced toward the noise, surprised. That fraction was all Caleb needed. He rose from behind the island, his pistol steady in a two-handed grip, and fired twice. The rounds hit Alpha center mass, punching through his body armor and slamming him against the wall. He slid to the floor, his assault rifle clattering to the ground. At the same moment, the darkness outside the shattered back door was filled by a large, silent shape. Leo Gallo, dressed in black tactical gear, stepped inside, his own weapon at the ready. "Perimeter's secure," he said, his voice calm in the chaos. "Frank sends his regards, says you owe him a trout." Caleb didn't reply. He moved quickly to the main room, his weapon still raised. The two men at the front door had finally breached it, only to be met by a hail of fire from Leo, who had circled the farmhouse, cutting them down. The fight was over. Silence descended, broken only by the sound of the falling rain and the pained groans from the mercenary Caleb had shot in the kitchen. Caleb knelt beside Kaiser, his hand gently stroking the dog's neck. "You did good, buddy," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You did real good." Kaiser gave a low whine, licking Caleb's hand. He was hurt, he was broken, but he was alive. And in the end, the wounded guardian had saved his master one last time. Caleb stood, his eyes sweeping over the devastation in his home, the shattered doors, the bullet holes, the smell of cordite mixing with the scent of rain. This wasn't a victory. It was a statement. They had brought the war to his sanctuary, and he had met them with a fire they never expected. He looked at Leo, and in his friend's eyes, he saw the same grim understanding. This was only the beginning. The silence that followed the last gunshot was deeper than any noise. It was a heavy, ringing void filled only by the sound of the dying storm and the ragged breathing of the three men left standing. The battle was over. The siege was broken. Caleb moved first, his body aching, but his senses still razor sharp. He swept the farmhouse quickly, confirming the last of the hostiles were neutralized. Leo was already outside. His movements were an efficient dark blur in the rain, securing the perimeter and collecting the mercenaries' comms units. "They're all down," Leo confirmed, stepping back inside, dripping water from his gear. "But this team will have a check-in protocol. Croft and Wallace will know something's wrong soon." Caleb nodded, his mind already working on the next move. "One of them's still alive," he said, indicating the man he'd shot in the kitchen. "He's our bait." Their objective shifted instantly from defense to offense. Before the sun rose, they had one more ghost to catch. Caleb used a captured comms unit, keying the mic with the down leader's hand to bypass the biometric lock. He lowered his voice, adding a layer of static and pained breathing. "Alpha to base. Target neutralized, but we have a problem. Hayes had reinforcements. We've taken heavy casualties. We need exfil and a debrief, now. Croft needs to get here." It was a gamble, but a calculated one. Croft's arrogance would be his undoing. He would want to see the body, to stand over the man who had defied him. The reply came after a tense moment of silence. Croft's clipped, annoyed voice, "Understood. I'm on my way. Keep the scene sterile." They set the trap with grim efficiency. An hour later, Harrison Croft's black SUV sped up the driveway. He stepped out, wearing a long, dark overcoat, his face a mask of smug satisfaction as he surveyed the bullet-riddled farmhouse. He walked toward the shattered front door, expecting to be greeted by his victorious mercenaries. Instead, he was met by Caleb and Leo, who stepped from the shadows on either side of him, their weapons leveled. Croft's smugness dissolved into pure, unadulterated shock, then fear. He made a desperate move for a pistol concealed in his coat. But Leo was faster, disarming him with a quick, brutal move that left Croft gasping on the ground, his wrist broken. "Puzzles solved, Croft," Caleb said, his voice as cold as the morning air. As Leo secured the groaning developer, Caleb made one last call. This one was to Sheriff Riley. "The storm has passed," he said, and gave her the address. Sheriff Riley and the two deputies she trusted arrived as the first hint of dawn broke, the sky turning from black to a deep, bruised purple. She stepped out of her car, her face pale as she took in the scene, the bodies of professional soldiers, the fortified farmhouse, and Harrison Croft, the untouchable crime lord of the county, bound and bleeding on the ground. She looked at Caleb, and in her eyes, he saw a new understanding. She finally knew what kind of trouble she had allied herself with. "A home invasion," Caleb said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "They were well armed. We defended ourselves. This is the man who sent them." Riley knelt, looking Croft square in the eye. "Harrison Croft," she said, her voice ringing with the authority she had fought so hard for. "You're under arrest." As her deputies hauled Croft away, She turned back to Caleb. What about the bigger picture? The names on that drive? That storm is already making landfall somewhere else, Caleb said. He had kept his end of the bargain. The moment he had texted Leo, he had triggered a second protocol, a dead man's switch. The full, unredacted data package from the hard drive was already being transmitted over a secure, multi-layered channel to a 3-star general at the Pentagon, a man who had once been his mentor and whose integrity was beyond question. Director Wallace's reign was over. He just didn't know it yet. Riley held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded. She understood. He had given her the local victory she needed while he handled the ghosts she couldn't see. My report will say you and your friend acted in self-defense. After that, you should probably disappear, Hayes. A man with your skills attracts the wrong kind of attention. I think I'm done disappearing, Caleb said. By the time the sun was fully up, the official vehicles were gone. Frank Miller had given a silent acknowledgement from his distant ridgeline. A single flash of a mirror reflecting the new sun, a signal Caleb returned with a small flashlight. All clear. Leo clapped Caleb on the shoulder. Time to be a ghost again, he said. Stay safe, brother. Then he too was gone, melting back into the wilderness. Caleb was finally alone. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world scrubbed clean, washed by the rain. He walked back into his farmhouse, the porch steps groaning under his weight. He gently cleaned and redressed the bandage on Kaiser's head, just as Dr. Volkov had shown him. The dog, though weak, was breathing evenly now, his tail giving a slight, hopeful thump against the floorboards. Caleb sat down, leaning his aching back against the timber wall, and looked out at the majestic, sun-drenched peaks of the Appalachian Mountains. The ghosts of his past were still there. They always would be, but for the first time in years, they were quiet. He had come to this place seeking peace, thinking it was something you could find by running away. He had been wrong. Peace wasn't a place you could find. It was a territory you had to win, a piece of ground you had to defend with everything you had. He had fought for his sanctuary, for his friend, for his soul. He laid his hand on Kaiser's flank, feeling the steady rise and fall of his chest. The air was clean, the world was quiet, and his dog was alive. In the profound silence of the new morning, surrounded by the wreckage of the war he had just won, Caleb Hayes was finally home.